Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be doing part 5, the final part of my review of the cards for the Covert Operations expansion. It is no longer upcoming, it is out now. As I'm recording it, it's been out for about 4 hours, so whenever you're seeing this video, the expansion will be live, so feel free to, open up the game, open up any packs with any gold you've saved up, or if you haven't saved up any gold, you don't have any of the new cards, just queue onto ladder and you'll play against the new cards, and that should be fun enough. But we have some cards left to review, so I will be doing that. And there is a balance patch going out alongside this expansion that is also already come out. And I will be doing a separate video on that either later today or tomorrow in the near future. You can expect that. But let's roll the intro and jump into the last bunch of cards.
What a performance there by J-King.
J-King, full plot armor.
J-King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J-King is our world champion! J-King 7! What? The back-to-back Cards world champion!
Alrighty, so normally I go through the all of the cards by nation and rarity. Today, however, we're going to be starting with a specific archetype or specific theme, just because it makes sense. And we're going to be starting with a card that we have seen before. It's the 121st Infantry Regiment. That's because all 12 Retribution cards have been revealed, so I'm going to be going over all of the ways to generate Retribution and then all 12 of the Retributions. And I'll very quickly go through the ones we have seen already. So the 121st Infantry Regiment, this guy adds an outrage to your hand. It's a 5-cost, 5/4 blitz. Pretty good. Standard, so you can run 4 of these in your deck. And outrage is a non-collectible, develop a retribution. So this will give you one of 3 retributions to pick between, and you pick one of them. And what retribution is a pool of 12 different non-collectible cards. There's 11 orders, 1 countermeasure, and they will have a variety of different effects that we will be looking at soon. But this is develop one of those 12. So you're given 3 options, so you have a 25% chance of seeing any given retribution. Then the elite for this archetype is Yank. You could just run like 121st in a non-retribution list, and, the developer retribution, just a little extra value on the side. However, if you want to build a dedicated retribution list, you're going to want to run Yank, because Yank is a 6-cost order. This battle, when you develop a card, also develop a retribution. So that applies to non-retribution develop cards like Bomber, Mafia, Ingenuity, etc. However, it also applies to Outrage. So if you have played Yank, and then when you play an Outrage, you will develop 2 retributions, because you develop once for the Outrage and then once for the Yank, because you're developing a card. Now let's get to the actually new ways of generating retribution, and then we will get to the retribution going over the 3 that we have seen already. So the new way to generate retribution, Furor, is a 1-cost limited order. Fully repair a friendly damaged unit, add an outrage to your hand. And this requires the units to be damaged. It says friendly damaged unit, not just fully repair a friendly unit. So the unit has to be damaged. You can't just toss this out. You can't toss this out on an opponent's unit. So this is not just a free outrage. And I think that's really good. Because if this just said fully repair a unit, you could target non-damaged units, you could target enemy units. As long as there is a unit on the board, you could just get an outrage. And that seems a little too cheap. They probably didn't want to just have a 1-cost add outrage to hand, essentially. However, this restriction makes the card harder to use, because you have to have a damaged unit on board. And if you're playing like a ramp deck, often you aren't playing units right away, and then when you are playing units, you're tossing them out, and then your opponent is going to remove them on their turn. So there's not a ton of opportunity to damage your units. Obviously, you could run this, you could use this to repair a 121st if you trade this into a unit with 3 or less attack, and then just repair back to 4. Not a great value, but, you get an outrage, and then you'll get another outrage later. I could see not running a full stack of this, even inside a dedicated Yank retribution list, just because it seems a little weak, especially like when these cards like supply priorities, which just gives you much, much better utility. And yes, it doesn't develop a retribution, but I mean, if you can pull off Yank, you're going to have more retributions than you need to play. This will generate more value than there are cards in your opponent's deck that are necessary to deal with. So Furor, I don't think is going to be a full stack, but, It's an interesting way to generate outrage. And then we have the other way and final way to generate outrage, which is blue and gray, which is a 6-cost 6/6 infantry. When a friendly unit, including this, is destroyed, add an outrage to your hand. So essentially, this is a 6-cost 6/6 destruction at an outrage, which is substantially worse than 121st, but it also applies to all other units you play, which is a lot of potential outrages. And again, outrages are retributions that cost 1 more. However, if you have a yank, every single outrage is 2 retributions. So this is potentially a lot of value generation. It's not great, but unlike Furo, you can just toss this out on its own, and if it dies, you get an outrage, and your opponent had to kill a 6/6. That's fine. You don't need this to do insane value. You can just toss it on its own. So I think you will run 2 of these in any yank deck. I doubt it's going to be getting a ton of value. There's a decent chance it gets suppressed, because unlike the 121st, you can't trade it out immediately. But, you know, if your opponent's dropping suppress on this, I think you're kind of fine. They're suppressing a 6/6 and not a guard, not like some form of healing. I think you're pretty happy with this card. I think this is just a fine, fair card. It's kind of bad, but, you know, it's one of the only ways to get outrage, so you're going to play it. And then what are the Retribution cards? So these 3 we've seen before. There's the 2-cost order, deal 5 damage to target unit. This is just really good. Cheap piece of removal that can attack any unit type. We have 2 credits, deal 2 damage to a target unit, draw a card. Not as good removal, but it's cycle, and US can lack for card draw, so this is just a good way to, if you're low on cards in hand, you're looking for yank, whatever it is, just pick this. Deal 2 damage is not insignificant, and you draw a card. And importantly, neither of these can go face. There's very few Retribution cards that can damage the HQ, and that's a very, very good thing, because otherwise Retribution would just kind of turn into a burn list. And then the last card we looked at is 5-cost Retribution, deal 2 damage to all enemy units. This is not a amazing AoE, but US does not have amazing AoE, so you're fine picking this. Like, you're probably not going to pick this on like an empty board, but this is just a good one to pick if you're in a losing situation, or if you're in a situation where your opponent has a big board of units and you play an outrage and you see this, you're like, hey, it's an AoE, play it. So yeah, you have a just good removal, a bit of card draw, and an AoE as the first 3 cards of Retribution we've seen, and just like 3 different effects that you might want. And that's sort of the benefit of Outrage, is that you get to pick something that is going to be helpful in your situation, either immediately that turn or just looking ahead. Then we get to the other 9 Retributions. So the first one is we have a 0-cost to deal 2 damage to target unit. So this is just something to throw it immediately if you have hand size issues, if there's a unit you need to remove immediately, and you don't really have the credits to do it. This is just pretty solid, and, you know, if you get a yank off and you're in a slower matchup, you might be picking this a lot just to make room in your hand. But yeah, like, if you compare this to, say, this, you don't draw the card, but it's free, and free 2 damage is free 2 damage. Then we have a 1-cost countermeasure. When a friendly unit is destroyed, destroy a random enemy unit. This is incredibly powerful. Like, this is like an amazing countermeasure. This is in the top 25% of countermeasures in this game. Probably better than that, actually. This is probably in like the top 10% of countermeasures in this game. This is an amazing countermeasure at 1. That's insane. At 2, this card would be like this card would be like playable at 2 if this was just like a card that you could run in a deck. At 1 credit, this card is insane, and it's also really, really annoying to me that they're adding 1 countermeasure to Retribution, because there's 12 options on Retribution, so your opponent is going to be offered this 25% of the time, and then even less than that are they going to pick it, because sometimes they're going to want removal, sometimes they're going to want some of the ones we're going to be showing down the line. And your opponent's probably playing some form of ramp deck with this, so they're going to be floating 1 or more credits very, very often, probably almost every turn. So the fact that, especially once Yank starts going off, you have to just always assume they all have an infinite number of this card active at all times. And that's really, really, really annoying, because this is a particularly disruptive countermeasure. Because you're going to want to attack with everything and then trade last, except there are other US countermeasures, like in the Navy, where you want to trade first, so that you have the other units left over to trade into it if the unit's still alive. Or there's air defense, where you want to attack with the lowest attack thing first to trigger air defense. However, if, you're trying to play around Retribution, you probably want to trade the lowest attack thing into the unit, and go face with all the other units on board. So yeah, it just disrupts the flow of play so ludicrously much. And even if people never pick this card, just the fact that they can pick this card is enough to just be incredibly frustrating if you try to play around it. And if you don't know about this card, if you're not, like, super familiar with all the Retribution cards, you don't play against Retribution a lot, and you're not going to play around this card, and it could just completely blow you out. And that's not going to be fun either. I'm not a huge fan of the Retribution idea. It's just ludicrous value generation and kind of an RNG fest. And having this card where it's like, it's fine, you play it immediately, 0 cost, 2 damage, okay. Let's all laugh at that Italian card, the 0 cost deals 0 to 2 damage. And then you have this. Why? But anyways, let's keep moving on. We have a 1 cost Retribution. Target unit gets +1/+1, set its operation cost to 0. So it's basically like Land of the Free, but it comes with a stat buff. This card, you're not going to pick this one very often, but when you do pick it, it's probably going to be insane. Like, that's sort of the issue with Land of the Free, is it's sometimes a really, really good card. It's just not a really, really good card often enough for you to put it in your deck. However, if you are generating this off of another card, especially once you get Yank off, if you're generating this off of, like, like your 6th Retribution in hand, because you have Yank, you're just going to pick this. Like, even if it's only reducing the operation cost by, like, 1, that's a 1 cost bolster. That's pretty good. And, the +1/+1 might be the difference between trading out a unit or not trading out a unit. This is just a really, really solid card. Then we have Retribution, 2 cost. Give a friendly unit +2/+2 and Blitz. So it's like pre-nerf Finest Hour, but it can target any unit type. And I think that's pretty accurately describes just how strong this card is, because Finest Hour is one of the best cards in the game and had to be nerfed, and that exclusively targeted air units. The big difference, though, is you could build a deck around Finest Hour. You can't really build your deck around this Retribution, because, again, you only have a 25% per outrage, and you're going to need to be playing the outrage cards, which are kind of slow. You're going to need to be play ramp with those outrage cards. So sort of my point is, you're not going to be running any, like, Fury units for the chance that you get this, and you play this on a Fury unit and pop off. You're not going to be running Long Tom to give Long Tom Blitz. Also, it was rotated. This is just, like, not... Like, it's gonna be good sometimes. It's very similar to the this Retribution, the +1/+1 set 0 operation cost. Sometimes it's gonna be good. Sometimes you're gonna have, like, a blue and gray that you give Blitz to trade out a big unit. Sometimes you're gonna have, like, a B-17 maybe, and you give a Blitz. You're probably playing Bomber Mafia in this deck, so you can give a whatever bomber you get off Bomber Mafia Blitz sometimes. And sometimes you're not even going to play it for the Blitz. Sometimes you're just going to play this for the +2/+2 to a unit, because it helps with trading out a unit, and your other options were too expensive or didn't affect the board. So yeah, this is not as scary as it might look. However, it's probably a really good option. And again, the issue with Retribution is you can't play around all 12 cards at once. Like, you can't play around the possibility of your opponent blitzing you out with this plus a bomber, while playing around the AoE board clear, while playing around, like, the big single target removal, while playing around the countermeasure. Like, there's just too many cards to play around, and it's playing around randomness. Like, it's not like your opponent has offered all 12 cards, and you have to, like, sort of get into their head as to which card they pick. You don't know what your opponent's options are. Maybe they picked the quote-unquote worst option that you choose not to play around because it's the worst option, because the other 2 options were even worse. Like, maybe they got the 3 worst options, and they picked the best of those 3 worst options, so it's the 9th worst, or the 10th worst Retribution card they could pick in that situation. So you're probably not going to be playing around that, but maybe that's the card they got. So yeah, not impressed with Retribution. I hope it's bad. Similarly to Covert. I hope Covert is bad, but we will get to that. Then we have another 2-cost Retribution. Target friendly unit gets destruction, add a copy to owner's hand. This is just another form of value generation for the deck. You can play this on something defensive, like a Glamour Boys, to just get another guard and healing. You can play this on something and immediately trade it out and then replay it. You can play this on something really, really big, like a B-17, one of the jet production orders, production order bombers. Or you can play this on something like 121st or Blue and Gray to just use your Retribution to generate more Retribution. And again, if you have Yank off, you play a 121st, you play this Retribution on it, and then trade it out, and then you get an Outrage, which gives you 2 Retributions, and you replay 121st, and then one of those 2 Retributions is a second one of this, and then you get another Outrage, which gives you another 2 Retributions. Essentially, there's a lot of ways to start to go infinite, towards infinite value with Retribution and Yank. Now, obviously, all of this is kind of slow, but having an infinite value generation tool is not something that Cards particularly needs. And I say that as someone who loves Night Hunters. Or not Night Hunters. Wrong card. Night Witches. I absolutely love Night Witches. My favorite card this game has ever printed, and my favorite deck was built around using Night Witches to go infinite. And Night Witches used to be add a From the People and a 1/2 bomber to your hand, shuffle this into your deck, so you would draw down to no cards in deck, so you would just get an infinite number of From the People and a 1/2 bomber. But the difference is, 1, you have to build your deck around it. I mean, you have to build your deck around Yank. But 2, you got a 1/2 bomber and a deal 3 damage to an enemy unit once a turn for the rest of the game. That's not particularly good. If you're going infinite on Yank Retribution stuff, you're going infinite on a huge range of cards that can just nuke the board, they can generate units, they can buff your units, they can deal HQ damage, they can ramp you. It's insane. I don't like this mechanic, and I hope it's bad, and it might be bad. It's really, really slow. It has to be a really, really slow meta. The issue with these types of decks, though, is sometimes someone's just going to play this on ladder, because they like to have fun with Retribution, and it prevents anybody from playing control decks on ladder, because, you know, sometimes you'll queue into a Retribution list and have 0 chance. And sometimes someone's going to bring this to a tournament because they want to target someone playing a control deck. So, you know, if you just have 3 ultra-heavy decks, ultra-value decks, and your opponent brings 1 control deck, you don't ban it, you beat them with your lineup. It's just rock, paper, scissors. It's really, really boring. It's bad for the competitive scene, and it's bad for the future of Cards, because it also prevents the options you can give for US, because you have to think, well, if we give US too many good tools, will they just be able to make a Yank deck? Yeah. Anyways, let's keep going. We're on to the 3-cost Retributions. There's 1, deal 4 damage to target in the enemy support line. Your HQ gets +2 defense. This one can hit HQ. So this can be a 3-cost deal 4 to the opponent. And it heals you. Because that's what Retribution needed. It needed healing and burn in the same card. Now, this is obviously, it can also be used to hit units. There's quite a few good units in the support line that you need to be dealt 4 damage. But this can also be used as burn, depending on the game state. You can just toss this out as healing, depending on the game state. Solid choice. Always a solid choice of Retribution. Then we get to the other 3-cost Retribution, which is distribute the attack of a friendly unit as damage between all enemies. So basically it's Shenano on, not even Shenano on a stick, because it's not really a stick. It's find a stick and then turn it into Shenano. So, you know, you can play this on like a Blue and Gray, and it's like a 6 damage Shenano. That's pretty good. Once Shenano reaches 6, it's pretty good. But that requires having the unit on board. So, like, it's a very situational Retribution, where, like, sometimes it's really good, but you'll probably never pick it if you're, like, on a completely empty board state, because there's probably just better options you can pick. But yeah, no, like, this will sometimes be really good, and it can burn face. And if the opponent has an empty board, because they played around all of your removal Retribution, well, just slam a big guy and then use this Retribution and burn all of the attack into face. Yeah, pretty good. Then we have the 4-cost Retribution, which is develop 2 Retributions, and you better believe this stacks with Yank. So, you know, if you have Yank, and then you play Outrage, and you develop into the removal you need to remove your opponent's unit, and then the second you develop into this Retribution, and then you play this Retribution to develop 2 more Retributions, which then Yank will develop an additional Retribution. Yeah, this is just, again, we get back into the infinite value generation, because you can develop 2 more pieces of removal, and then Yank will develop you into a third Retribution, which can then generate this Retribution, and then you're just going infinite. And again, this is incredibly slow. Like, you're spending 4 cost to develop 2 cards. However, you're probably playing this in a ramp deck, so, like, you might even have more than 12 credits, most likely, by this point in the game. And again, you're not going to be doing this against Jaguar. You're not going to be... Like, you probably manage to pull this off semi-frequently against Frontline, just if you get, like, a decent start. But, like, Jaguar, you're probably not going to do this. The game's going to be over one way or the other before you get to doing this stuff. But, like, if your opponent's playing any kind of control, like, yes, you're just going to go down the infinite Retributions route. Like, why would you not do this? And then we get to the last Retribution, which is the big one. Not necessarily the best one, but the big one. It's a 12-cost Retribution, deal 3 damage to any target, including HQ, draw 3 cards, gain 3 extra credit slots, so this is going to help you achieve that, like, 24 credit slots, play, like, 30 Retributions in a turn, game state, and in case the deal 3 damage, draw 3 cards, gain 3 credit slots was not enough, give all of your units +3/+3. So this is an incredible card. Honestly, the worst part of this card is the draw 3 cards, and because that's probably going to be a bad thing. I think most of the time, you're in a game state where you can afford to play this card, you probably have a pretty large hand size. And also you might be worried about reaching fatigue. Like, you kind of want to just generate infinite value and not draw cards from your deck. So this drawing cards is actively bad. And this card having a bad part of it is a good thing. Because if this was just like deal 3 damage, gain 3 health, gain 3 extra credit slots, your units get +3/+3, this would be so much better, and in Retribution would just be all about getting an infinite number of these. Luckily, the draw 3 means that you can't just, like, you know, play 10 of these over the course of the game to try to win, because you will deck yourself and die on fatigue. However, playing 1 of these once with, like, even 2 units on board is insane value, and the fact that you always have to be afraid of your opponent having this card is really bad. And also, like, you know, in a control mirror where you have a smallish hand, maybe you haven't drawn Yank yet, maybe you haven't popped off yet, but, like, it's a largely empty board, and you've reached 12 credits, just drop this. You draw a new hand of cards, essentially. You then go up to 15 credit slots on the following turn. Any units you have on board get +3/+3, so even if you have, like, just, like, a guard in the support line or something, +3/+3, huge buff, and you deal 3 damage to the enemy HQ if they have no units, or you can, like, try to remove something small. This card is just incredible. Retribution is just absolutely nuts, and I don't like it. And, you know, there's... what are the 3 new archetypes of this expansion? We have Retribution, self-credit denial, and Covert. I hate Covert and Retribution, and I think self-credit denial is too strong. Despite that, I'm still excited for the expansion. I still think this expansion is going to be a lot of fun. I just think this expansion is going in very, very bad directions, and I think this should be an exception and not the rule for future expansions. I think no future expansion, at least for the next year, should have this much RNG, should have this much just sheer power, this much value generation, or else cards will just, like, power creep to the moon very, very quickly. And I don't want to see that. But then we're done with Retribution, so now let's get into the normal cards. We only have 1 British card here left to reveal. First Responders is the 4-cost British countermeasure. And 4-cost countermeasure, it better be good. At the end of the enemy turn, add a 5th Brigade to your support line with +1/+1 for each enemy unit. And the 5th Brigade is the 1/5 guard. So, how good is this? Well, it's you spend 4 credits to hold this up, and then the enemy goes, and you're not playing a guard, so the enemy can hit face, presumably. Like, let's say you're holding this up on turn 4. You know, your opponent can hit face with everything. If they see you float 4 credits, they probably know you have this. especially on turn 4. But they hit face with everything, and then at the end of their turn, you get the 5th Brigade, and then you can attack or move with the 5th Brigade on your turn because it gets spawned at the end of the enemy turn, so it doesn't have the summoning sickness. Well, how good is that? Well, let's say your opponent is playing any sort of frontline or Jaggro deck or Heinz. By turn 3, turn 4, they will probably have at minimum 3 units on board. And it's very unlikely unless they're Jaggro with a really good start, they probably won't have killed you or done even a particularly large amount of damage. Like particularly Heinz and frontline can easily hit 3 units on board and have dealt like next to no damage to you. And then you hold up first responders on turn 4. They waste their turn not playing any more units to play around this. And then you get a 4/8 guard, which is just C4th Highlanders. You basically played a delayed C4th Highlanders, but better since the attack stays on your end. And that's a pre-nerfed C4th Highlanders. For those not in the loop, C4th Highlanders used to be a 1/8 guard that had +3 attack on the enemy's turn, so it was functionally a 4-cost 4/8 guard. This is a 4-cost 4/8 guard, but the attack is on your turn. The one downside is you don't get it out immediately, so you are at risk of just like getting blown out by a Blitzkrieg because you're holding up first responders rather than playing an actual guard. But the fact that it comes at the end of the opponent's turn means they can't even suppress it preemptively. You are guaranteed to be able to attack with this. And the 3 is just sort of the benchmark. 3, I think, is sort of the standard number of units that are going to be on the board by turn 3. And if you hit 3 units on this, this is really, really good. If you hit less than 3 units on this, this is kind of weak. But on the other hand, the less units they have on board, the less immediate need you have for a huge guard. So even if they only have 2 units on board, you're kind of fine with a 3/7. Like a 3/7 guard is pretty good. Like in 0 units and 1 units, this card is bad. 2 units, this card is good. Not great, but it's good. 3 units, this card is great. 4 units plus, this card is insane. So essentially what I'm trying to say is this countermeasure is absolutely insane. Now the question is, what decks are going to be able to run this? Because it's a very difficult card to run. It's an incredibly powerful card, but what deck are you playing this in? Because I think Britain just has better options and more safe and more consistent options as an ally nation. Because if you're playing Brit as an ally nation, you're going to have less access to heal and less access to guard. So you're probably going to want something like Glamour Boys rather than a first responders. And in like a countermeasure deck, this seems just kind of too expensive. A countermeasure theme seems to be more about dumping stuff quickly. Like maybe you can run 1 or 2 of these, but you're not going to be able to run a lot of them. And then something like Poland Legions, you're not going to want to float the credits. So like, this could work in either a stall deck, sort of like a unitless Britain stall deck where you have a win condition in your deck. Commonwealth's gone, but like you can still run the escort groups to put in the I'm blanking on the name of the card, but the deal 8 damage if it's been in your deck for 4 turns card. Armaments, you put in 3 armaments, you play a unitless deck. You'll probably run first responders in that, just because you can pin a bunch of stuff, drop a bunch of stuff, and then hold up first responders. Or a British ramp deck, where you're also running stuff like Glamour Boys, but sometimes you're just going to hold up a first responders, because you do like turn 2 War Machine, turn 3 pass on 4 credits, and your opponent is now stuck in a situation of, if I don't commit to the board, I'm just going to get blown out, because they're just going to start playing 5 drop, 6 drop, 7 drop, etc. But if I do commit to the board, and they have first responders, I'm going to get blown out, because they're going to get like, you know, a 4/8 guard, or a 5/9 guard. They're just going to get they're going to get a Grenadier Guards on turn 4. Or not even turn 4, turn 3. Yeah, this card is incredibly powerful. Just how exactly are we going to figure it out? I'm not sure, but I think this effect is ludicrously powerful, especially for a standard. I think this should be a special, and I would not be that surprised if this card gets nerfed in the future, just because I could imagine this card terrorizing the lower ranks. Yeah, just an insane card. And the other thing about this card is, even if they don't hold it up, even if they don't play it in their deck, the fear put into you when a British player or a British ally deck floats 4 credits is going to be so high. Because there's going to be so many decks and so many positions where it's like, you know, you have like 2 units on board. and your opponent floats 4 credits. And it's like, if they don't have first responders and they're just floating 4 credits, I have to push the board this turn. This is the turn to push, because it means their hand is full of expensive cards that they're going to reach if I don't pressure them out soon. So they float 4 credits because they have a bad hand. I have to push now. I have to flood the board and hit them with everything I have. If they float 4 credits and you flood the board and they do have first responders, there's a lot of decks where you just immediately lose the game. Like giving your opponent a Grenadier Guards, it will just lose you the game. Yeah. So this just creates another 50-50 situation, which I don't like. Yeah. There's a lot of cards that we're going to be talking about today that I don't particularly like, and first responders is one of them. But let's move on to the 174th Independent, a Japanese covert unit. 3 cost, 1 operation cost, of course, because it's covert. Limited. It's a 1/4 infantry with Fury. After this unit attacks the enemy HQ, it gets +1/+1 and you draw a card. So, if you can get this to the front line, this guy attacks HQ for 1, and you draw a card, and then it attacks HQ for 2, and you draw a card, and then this is a 3/6 Fury in the front line. That's insane. A 3/6 Fury that dealt 3 damage to the HQ and drew you 2 cards, and will continue to draw you cards on future turns. That card's insane. However, if you play this card on 3, and you don't have the front line, your opponent's just gonna, like, attack into this with a Hellcat or a Sherman, and it dies immediately. It does nothing. It doesn't grow. It doesn't draw you cards. Or your opponent will, like, go face with the Hellcat or go face with the Sherman, and then, you know, this doesn't grow. There's no benefit for this being coverted for multiple turns. This will just sit there and do absolutely nothing. And even if you finally, like, clear the front line and push this to the front line, odds are your opponent's immediately going to kill it with, like, a Schitzen or something. Or, you know, trade it out with any other number of units. The world where this guy gets to the front line and sticks and then attacks face is very, very slim. In a Jaguar deck, I think this card is just bad. Like, if this is your only covert card in the deck, I think it's just bad. Your opponent's going to know what it is, and they're just going to remove it before it can do anything. However, where I think this card has potential is in a covert, a wider covert deck, like a US-Japan covert deck, or a Soviet-Japan covert deck, where you're running this alongside, like, a dozen other covert units. Your opponent has no idea which one this is. You push it to the front line, and they don't trade into it because they're scared it's the 5/3 ambush guy. And then you attack face twice, get a 3/6. Your opponent probably removes it after that. Like, I find it ludicrously unlikely that this card ever sticks for once revealed for more than a turn. However, just triggering it once is probably good enough. Maybe you can do that. But, you know, maybe you don't do that. Maybe that's just not good enough. Maybe that's just worse than Soviet US covert. Yeah. This is one of the weaker covert units. But it's has a lot of potential. It's a very scary card. But yeah, I think it's just not good enough. Then we have 40th Cavalry Regiment. I revealed this on my channel, so you can go back and look at my card reveal card. So I'm not going to talk about this too much more, but this is one of the central cards in the self-credit denial archetype. Very, very powerful. This is the card that you're going to be wanting to play on turn 3, basically 100% of the time. And it also has a potential outside of self-credit denial in a sort of combo decks just because of its destruction effect, reduce the cost of all cards in your hand by 1. I saw somebody mention that you can play this with Petliakov to prevent the deployment effect. Seems a little niche, but you could in fact do that, maybe in like a self-credit or in a self-damage type of deck, where you know you play Petliakov, you play 40th Cavalry, so you don't lose the credit slot, and then you destroy it, maybe even stand together it, or is that the name of the card? Whatever the name of the card is, the one that destroys it and turns it into a tank. And you reduce the cost of all of your sickles and red dons and whatnot in hand and pop off. Maybe you can do that. This is just a really, really cool card, really, really powerful card. Then we have the Great Expanse. I also revealed this in my previous video, so check that out if you want to hear more of my more in-depth thoughts on this. But basically, this is the self-credit denial win condition. Incredibly powerful card. This card just will win you the game so many times. This card is just like a win the game on a stick. However, for it to be a win the game on the stick, you have to have denied yourself credits, and it's sort of making up for the fact that this, it's an interesting payoff. It's sort of like self-damage, where self-damage, you can do crazy stuff. You have crazy tempo removal, you can dump a ton of stats really, really early on the game, or really on the board really, really early, On the downside of you're paying a ton of health to do so, and then your opponent might just kill you. Self-credit denial is quite similar, where you are reducing your credits a ludicrous amount to try to get these crazy payoffs, but there's always a chance that you just don't hit one roof, and then you just have like 3 credits a turn, and your opponent has like 9 credits a turn, and they just kill you because they have 6 more credits than you every single turn. But if you can hit a 1 roof, then you can hit a Great Expanse, and then you can give like +6/+6 to all your units and win the game immediately. Yeah, really, really good card. I'm not going to get into it in this video. I'm going to save it for the balance change video, which will be coming probably later today or tomorrow. Tomorrow, I would guess. But they did nerf 1 roof preemptively to 5 credits, and I think this is a huge nerf. A deserved nerf. Like, I am glad that it is 5 credits. Like, if they didn't do it now, they would have had to do it, like, within a month anyways. Very, very deserved nerf, but it is a huge nerf, because that means it delays everything in this deck by an entire turn. This is this is like this is a far bigger nerf than most 1 credit nerfs. Like, nerfing most cards by 1 credit, it's just like, oh, this card's now too slow to run in a deck. Or like, oh, this card, you still want to run it in a deck, but now you're going to have to fit other cards into the deck to fit the curve that this card got bumped out of now. 1 roof is the heart of this deck. Like, it is the lifeblood of self-credit denial. You need to hit 1 roof. And you need to hit 1 roof after denying yourself credits, which means you need, because that's what's going to give you more credits, but that means you have to hit 5 credit slots to play 1 roof, which means you need to hit 5 credit slots and also have denied the amount that you are happy with at minimum 3, which means at minimum 8, turn 8, are you going to be starting to play 1 roofs probably, rather than turn 7, or if you want to greed out a little bit more, you could now wait till turn 9, previously turn 8, and it's also going to mean, even after like the first 1 roof turn, it's going to make your playing additional 1 roofs in 1 turn harder. Just all around, huge, substantial nerf to the deck. However, it's still probably going to be tier 1. Might not be like the best deck in the game anymore. It still might be, but it might not be the just standalone best deck in the game anymore, but I would be shocked if it is not still a tier 1 deck. But we'll get into that more. I said I wasn't going to get into it and then got pretty deep into it, but we'll talk about it more later. Then we get to the Soviet cards. We have the 115th separate BTN, or as everybody is going to call this, the separate bin. It is a 1/2 covert standard. Reveal gets +2/+1 for each friendly turn it ends as covert. So this one is different from the other ones, which explicitly say if this has been covert for blank number of turns, and that is at the start of your turn, this is for each friendly turn it ends as covert. So this plays essentially as a 3/3, because, like, unless you manually reveal it immediately, but you'd have to be insane to do so, this is functionally a 3-cost 3/3 covert. And that's not particularly good. However, if your opponent doesn't flip it immediately, if they do flip it immediately, you played a 3-cost 3/3 and forced your opponent to trade. And that's kind of fine. Not great, but it's fine. If they don't flip it immediately, it goes to your turn. You can trade with it for 3 damage if you want, or you can push it to the front line, and now it is a 4/5. Or sorry, a 5/4. And 5/4 in the front line, like, covert, pretty good. You know, it's similar to the ambush guy. It doesn't have ambush, but it has slightly more health and doesn't lose you credits. And, you know, your opponent trades into it, kills, shoots, and it will just trade 1 for 1 with a lot of units that cost more than 3 to play, so you're kind of happy with that. And then you'll probably attack with it if it's in the front line on the following turn, but you could greed out and turn it into a 7/5. Or, you know, you play this on turn 3 and you just keep playing other covert units. You don't push this up, you just leave it in the front line, and it eventually becomes just that it just eventually one-shots your opponent, because your opponent is playing some sort of like ramp deck or unitless deck, and this just stays covert forever. So this is just a solid covert card. You're probably going to play at least 2 or 3 of these in the covert deck, maybe all 4 in the covert deck. Again, you use the Deuce to just try to cheat this guy out on turn 2. It's not an amazing card. It's not a flashy card. It's one of the less tilted covert cards, but it's just a solid guy who can very easily grow out of control. Then we have Respite, which is a 4-cost Soviet order, special rarity. Your units get +1/+3. The enemy HQ gets +5 defense. And I've seen some people say this card is bad. I do not know what they are on. This card is insane. This card is absolutely insane. So again, in my card reveal video, I talked about the Alliance and how the Alliance was the best buff card in the game a long time ago, and it had to be nerfed to 5 credits. And at 5 credits, it continued to see some limited play. But it used to be a 4 credit +2/+2 to all of your non-US units. Plus health is better than plus attack the vast majority of the time, especially now that Monsoon Rod is gone. Now that Monsoon Rod is gone, plus health is really, really good, especially combined with any amount of plus attack. So +1/+3 is way better than +2/+2. And like +1/+3 is like the perfect buff a man. Like if you're gonna have a +4 stat buff, you want it to be a +1/+3. That is the perfect amount. And the fact that this is cost at 4 credits and it hits all of your units, regardless of unit type, regardless of like unit nation, is insane. And the downside is the enemy gets +5 in defense. That doesn't matter because you're playing this on you're playing this in a deck that you board control wins you the game. Like you're playing this in some sort of mid-range deck, maybe an artillery deck, maybe an air deck, where just having board control wins the game. So giving your opponent +5 health does not matter whatsoever. It really doesn't. Like unless you're like in a top deck war and your opponent's at like 2 health, and like, you know, you have a 1 attack unit on board and you can't respite to kill them. That's a super niche situation. It's like never gonna happen. This card is just absolutely insane. It's incredibly powerful. It makes Soviets an interesting ally for a lot of other nations, like Brit-Soviet Air, maybe. This in Brit Air would be pretty good. This in Heinz would be pretty good. This in US Frontline would be pretty good. Even in Jaguar, this would be pretty good. This card is just absolutely insane. And you can even combine it with some pretty funny things like Kagoshima, so your opponent doesn't actually get the HQ defense. You can combine this with Chiro, so instead of gaining 5 defense, they take 5 damage. Yeah, those are sort of the 2 main cards. You can do this with the new Japan 2/2 Blitz guy to give that +5 attack on top of the +1/+3. Yeah, this is just an amazing card that doesn't immediately go into like a tier 1 deck, but this card will be in tier 1 decks in the future, absolutely, once people find out the best way to use this card. This card is insane, and I would not be that surprised if this card is nerfed at some point in the next like 2 years. Then we have a Soviet Elite card that I have had several people ask me my opinion on it, because my favorite card in the game, as I've already mentioned previously in this video, is Night Witches. And Night Witches was an infinite card. It was a Soviet Elite that generated an infinite number of itself, and that would go infinite on fatigue. And that is what I loved about the deck, is you just played a grindy attrition-style control deck, where you just played a ton of removal, tried to remove every single card in your opponent's deck, and then eventually you win the game just because you don't take fatigue damage and the opponent does. That is the entire point of the deck. That is my favorite archetype in any card game. And at first glance, 97th Rifles is an anti-fatigue card. And it's a Soviet anti-fatigue card. So this seems like this would be right up my alley, and I would absolutely love this card, and build Soviet control decks around this card. However, there's a very, very big difference between 97th Rifles and Night Witches, and let's get into it. So 97th Rifles is a 1-cost, 1/2 guard elite. So just on its own, that's pretty bad. 1-cost, 1/2 guard, not good. Destruction effect, shuffle 414th Rifles into your deck, then draw a card. So that is quite good. A 1-cost, 1/2 destruction draw card, pretty good. Like it's sort of, it's worse than Sickle, but it's on par with Sickle, and you run 4 Sickles in a lot of Soviet decks, so running 4 Sickles and this in a lot of Soviet decks would be fine. Now, it shuffles 414th Rifles into your deck. How good is that? But first, let's immediately say that this, if this gets suppressed, you're very, very sad. If this gets suppressed, you played a 1-cost, 1/2 infantry. And that sucks. Now, it baits out suppress, and like every single Soviet card ever is really, really bad to be suppressed. So, you know, maybe you're happy if this gets suppressed because they're not suppressing an armored train, or they're not suppressing like a 272nd. But you're not happy if this gets suppressed, and it can be suppressed at any point in the game. Then we look at 414th Rifles, which is a 2-cost 5/5 infantry, which is really, really good. Not amazingly good. Like, this isn't going to win you the game if you play this on turn 2. Now, if you can play this on turn 2, you're incredibly lucky, and it's incredibly good. But it's not going to just, like, snowball you out the game on turn 2 as a 2-cost 5/5. But a 2-cost 5/5 infantry 1-op, pretty good. Its destruction effect is shuffle 97th Rifles back into your deck, draw 3 cards, deal 3 damage to your HQ. So the 97th Rifles gives you 414th Rifles, which gives you 97th Rifles, which will give you 414th Rifles. So you just can go back and forth an infinite number of times between these, right? Wrong, because they both draw you cards. So 97th Rifles, it puts a card in your deck, but it also draws you a card. So you're going card equal. It is like this doesn't draw a card. Like, it does, like, and functionally it's really, really good for hand size and just, like, you know, having resources. It's a really good card, don't get me wrong. But exclusively looking at fatigue, this card goes neutral. Then we look at 414th Rifles, and it says, draw 3 cards, shuffle 1 into your deck. This draws you 2 cards. So every time a 14th Rifles dies, or 414th Rifles dies, it's like you're playing a convoy. And if you're not in fatigue, that's really, really good. This is a really, really good effect. Soviets can lack card draw, so having card draw on a stick is really, really good. And, like, the 3 damage, you're much happier about draw 3, take 3 than draw 5, take 5 in the form of 5-year plan. And also, this doesn't take a card slot in your deck because you're running this through 97th Rifles, and you can get it multiple times. This is an incredibly good card. But it doesn't work on fatigue, because 97th Rifles goes equal on fatigue, and 414th Rifles plays a convoy. So, you know, if you go down to 0 cards in deck and you play 97th Rifles, they kill it, it adds a card to your deck and then draws it. So you stay with 0 cards in deck, and then you play 414th Rifles and they kill it, and it puts 97th Rifles in deck, and then it draws that. And then you draw 2 additional cards, and also take 3 damage to your HQ. So you're going to draw 1 fatigue, 2 fatigue, and then you take the 3 damage fatigue, and then it goes to your turn and you draw the 3 fatigue, so you now have taken 9 damage. Across 1 turn, or I guess, like, 2 turns, and then you draw 4 fatigue. Like, you're taking 13 damage in 2 turns. That's not stopping fatigue. This does not stop fatigue. This is not a fatigue card. This is not comparable to Night Witches beyond both of them have the word shuffle into deck. That being said, it's an all-right card. Like, it's a cool card. I don't hate this card. I think it's fine. I think it's much more interesting than Strategic Focus. Like, it's a Soviet elite that is powerful, but not just like a sort of slap it powerful. Like, it's a card that requires at least some degree of thought, and it's not abundantly clear that putting this into your deck immediately makes it better, especially if you're playing a more, like, aggressive deck. Like, it's still probably good, but, like, it's a card that you have to think about whether or not you want to put it into your deck. And yeah, you know, it's just fine. Like, it's a good card. I think somebody asked me what are my thoughts, like, how excited I am about this card. Like, 1 out of 10, like 6. I don't know. It's a solid card. It will see play. I will play it, but this is not old Night Witches. If only we could be that lucky. Then we have the 101st Bezitza, which is a 3-cost, 3/6 infantry. 1 operation cost because it is covert. It is a covert elite. So this is going to be the elite card for Soviet covert. You know, covert is the flagship archetype for Soviets this expansion. What is their elite covert unit going to be? We've seen some pretty wacky and wild covert units up until this point. And what it is a guard, 3/6. At the start of your turn, your units get +2 attack, you lose 2 credits. And that's only when it's revealed. So it just seems not that good. Like, you're gonna play it in covert decks. It's not bad. Like, you're not gonna not run this card. Because just a 3-cost, 3/6 covert is pretty good. Because your opponent is going to attack into this, unsure what unit this is, and it's gonna flip over to be a guard. 6 health, it probably survives the attack, and now it's guarding other covert units. Or maybe now it's guarding your HQ. And then at the start of your turn, it gets +2 attack. So then it goes to 5 attack. And all of your other units get +2 attack, but you're playing a covert deck, so most of them are coverted, so they don't get the attack buff if they're coverted. Also, if you flip this on your turn, it says at the start of your turn, so you flip this on your turn, it doesn't get the attack buff, it doesn't give the attack buff, and then your opponent will just remove it. So it never gives the attack buff. So it's essentially just a 3-cost, 3/6 guard, and a 3-cost, 3/6 guard that can't be targeted by orders is just fine. However, it's incredibly boring, and sometimes the effect is actively negative. Like, sometimes the attack buff will not do anything other than just lose you 2 credits. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want the Covert deck to be good. I hate Covert. I want nobody to play Covert. It is an awful mechanic that is deeply unfun. And bad for the game. However, it's just kind of depressing. And I've also been complaining about Soviets just getting, like, just vanilla, really, really strong elites. So I shouldn't be complaining about them getting a bad Covert elite, but I don't know, man. This just ain't it. If this is, like, your elite of the expansion, that's kind of sad. But, yeah. Well, we'll move on. Then we get to a one other US card that I threw back here because it's not Retribution. It is Firebomb. It is a 4-cost limited US order. Deal 5 damage to a unit. Excess is dealt to random enemies if you have 2 or more unspent credits. So this sort of fits the unspent credits theme that US has going on. 4-cost, deal 5 damage to a unit. Not great removal, but it's not terrible removal. It's very comparable to Battery, which is 4-cost, deal 4 damage to a unit. Excess damage is dealt to the enemy HQ. That has seen very, very limited play in ramp decks. Now, it's seen a decent amount of play in, like, sort of burn decks. But it's seen limited play in ramp decks. Firebomb is just better than this in any deck that is not dedicated to burning. And even in decks dedicated to burning, it still might be better. Yeah, this is just a solid card. You might not just immediately throw this into ramp, just because it's not amazing. However, if US unit list comes back, and I think it's possible it does, this card immediately fits into it. It's over Battery, but maybe you run this alongside Battery, depending on what the removal package is looking like for that deck. So I think it's possible we see this card played in the future, but it's not a wacky effect. Like, Overflow on 5 damage, you're probably not going to have that much Overflow damage. But, like, it means that you can use this as sort of like a 1 damage clear against Jaggro. If they have a bunch of 1 health units, and you have 6 credits, you can deal 5 damage to one of the units. It does 4 Overflow and pings, hopefully, all of the other units. But, you know, it's sort of a Shenano-esque effect where maybe it hits face for 4 and you lose anyways. Then we have the last Polish card to talk about, which is a 2-cost order, standard, Stretch the Line. We have Hold the Line, now we have Stretch the Line. It is add a legion to your support line, then intel equal to friendly legions. So, on its own, it is a 2-cost, add a legions intel 1. And very, very importantly, the intel comes afterwards. So on turn 2, this is a 2-cost 3/3 legions, which is really, really good. A 2-cost 3/3 legions is better than a 3-cost 2/2/2 legions a lot of the time. Now, it's worse in some situations, like, you know, where you have a lot of credits and you just kind of want to get 2 legions down to start growing them with intel stuff. It's worse because it generates less Polish units to to use with Uprising. But this card is great because you can run this alongside Plan West. Like, you can do 2 and 2, you can do, like, 2 and 4, 1 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3, any combination of this. It's really, really good. And it gives Legions a thing to do on turn 2. And that was always the issue with Legions, is just Plan West was so slow, especially if you went second. Like, if you went second on a Legions deck and your first play is Plan West on turn 3, you're probably going to lose the game. Stretch the Line, incredible. 3/3. It trades out with 2 units from most aggro decks. Like, unless it's Jaggro and they have a Type 93, and then it trades with a 2/1 buff to 3/1 or a 2/2 buff to 3/2. But, like, Frontline, Heinz, Jaggro, if they don't have Type 93, this is eating 2 units, or at the very least, they don't trade, because they don't want to trade 2 units into this, so it sticks. And, you know, this can intel for more than 1, like, you know, if you have 3 Legions on board and you play Stretch the Line, it intels 4. But it's a intel 4, it's not intel once 4 times, so it's not going to trigger... It's not going to buff the Legions 4 times, it's going to buff it once, and you just intel 4. And intelling 4 doesn't really matter unless you have, like, the extra intel that burns the enemy HQ, but then you need that, plus Legions, and intel on their hand, and that just seems like a bad combination. But yeah, this is just a very, very solid card on its own, and this is like a solid draft card as well, because you can have, like, no other Legion cards in your, or intel cards or Legion cards in your deck, and this is just a 2-cost 3/3 infantry guard. And I said with Kurume Regiment, a 2-cost 3/3 guard is just good in a lot of decks. And it's going to be true for Poland. And last but not least, the last card of the expansion to look at is Infantry Regiment 2. It is a Finnish 5-cost special infantry, 4/6 guard. So 5-cost, 4/6 guard, not great, but it's not terrible. Salvage, 5-cost, 4/6 salvage guard. Okay, it's decent. With the text, your salvaged units destroy any units they damage. This is a very, very good effect, because most of the time you are salvaging blitz units. Most of the time, things in the front line will have blitz, and if you're playing against any sort of frontline deck, any sort of Heinz deck, any sort of Jago deck, they will have these cheap 1-cost blitz units. And you play an infantry regiment too, and if it sticks a turn, you hit a Greyhound, you hit a 35T, you hit a cavalry regiment, whatever, and then you will play it for 1 to 2 credits from your hand, and then it will trade immediately and remove something. So it's basically like you trade out a small unit in the front line, and it becomes 1 to 2 credits, destroy the biggest unit in the front line. And that's just really, really good. This is worse than, I think it's 61st Infantry Regiment, the 4/6 that makes your salvaged units 4/4s. It's worse than that, but you could play both of these. I think my first thought would be a Britain-Finland control deck. This doesn't really seem like what Japan-Finland really wants, because Japan-Finland has Winter Regiment. If you're playing Japan-Finland, the front line is probably empty, or you have better things to do. And this is just kind of not it. You don't really need the guard. But a slower deck like Britain-Finland, I think this could see play, but it's competing with a lot of very, very strong Finnish cards, so we'll have to see. But it's much more competitive than the last Finnish card we saw, which was something about Depot. It's not Depot Raid, is it? The one that would return it to the hand and salvage it. This is more competitive than that. This is more likely to see play than that. This is just a very solid card for Finland. And that brings us to the end of my review of the Covert expansion. Again, there is a balance patch that came out alongside of this, including 2 cards from the expansion that were changed preemptively, and I will be talking about that probably tomorrow. So subscribe if you want to catch that and you haven't already. Comment down below what you think about any of these cards. Let me know if I made any mistakes. I know I do most of these just like from memory when talking about other things, so I sometimes make mistakes. Let me know if I have any of those. Or let me know if you just disagree with me. Let me know if you do agree with me. Let me know what you have been playing since the expansion dropped. Subscribe if you haven't already. Comment, share, like, join Discord, YouTube things. Donate if you can. Thank you to everyone who has donated, and I will catch all of y'all in the next one.